All right, hello. I wanted to talk a little bit about the different stages that we have in the DAST and fuzzing tool. DAST and fuzzing both have a similar problem with the way that they run in pipelines. And so I wanted to see if there's a way that we can line these up and understand this problem a little bit more. So to understand the problem, one of the things I want to do is take a look at the other analyzers. So if we look at something like secret detection runs in the stage test. And if we look at any of the other security analyzers that are not fuzzing and not DAST, they all run in an existing built-in stage. So GitLab has 3 stages that are built in by default. Those are build, test, and deploy, and then a pre and post. Unfortunately, because DAST and fuzzing don't fit into any of those cleanly, we've had to define our own stages. So if we take a look at the DAST template here, what you'll see is that we have defined a 4-stage, which is DAST. So we have the built-in, which we're redefining the GitLab ones, build, test, deploy, and then we add the DAST. And we do the same thing over here on API fuzzing. So again, we have the 3 built-in, build, test, deploy, and those are just redefining those, because if you don't redefine those, I don't believe they show up. And then we add this 4th called fuzz. Now, if we look at coverage fuzzing actually does not define a stage at all, and we ask the user to set that up. So that's a little bit inconsistent, and we'll take a look at, let's take a look at the documentation here. So coverage fuzzing, you'll see in this documentation, we're telling the user to add this stage. But to simplify the setup, what we've done is, if we look at API fuzzing, we tell a user that this is the only code that they need to add. And the reason we can do that is because in the API fuzzing template here, we define these 4 stages right here. So the user doesn't have to put in stages into their CI, their GitLab CI file, because we already defined them. And let me jump over to DAST for a second, because DAST, again, we define these templates here, these 4 templates. But in the latest version, we actually remove those. So there's no templates defined, but it still has DAST. So if we follow the instructions for installing DAST, which is right here, basically, you include the template and then the DAST website. So I'm going to show that. So we have the DAST template. We don't really need the website, but I'll just do that for clarity. If we just do those 2 things using the latest template, you'll see that we get a linting problem. So, and that's because this template refers to the DAST stage, and the DAST stage is not part of the built-in one. Now, if we add that here, it works fine. So what we're requiring the user to do is add the DAST template. And that's not something that we have in our documentation. And I've opened up an issue that says clarify that the stage has to be added to the DAST file. Now, that's only true in the new latest. The previous one had it defined. So it worked just fine with the current one. But if we move over in 14.0 to the latest, the user will need to put that in there. So that then brings up this inconsistency, which is this latest DAST file doesn't define the DAST stage. On the other hand, API fuzzing defines a fuzz stage. So one of the questions here is, should we remove this altogether, remove this for fuzzing? And if we remove that for fuzzing, then we'll need to do the same thing, which is clarify that the stage needs to be added to run fuzzing in the GitLab YAML file. So same text for this issue, except with the word fuzzing. So it makes sense that both those should be the same for API fuzzing, because API fuzzing and DAST run conceptually at the same time, which is typically after a deploy to staging. So I just wanted to try to get this in line and make sure that that the user experience is the same. The downside is that ultimately we need to have the user add the stage into their GitLab YAML file like this. So they would have to add something like this or -fuzz if they're running those two. Now, one of the reasons that we removed it from the template was because of this issue, which customer ran into this problem where they had their own stages, they incorporated the DAST template, and then it overrode their stages. And so we wanted to remove that overly prescriptive approach and let the customer define all their stages and not override any of their work. Now, one solution is that they can move this template here to the top of their YAML file. But again, that kind of creates a limitation. And the question is like, why are we defining the order in those stages that those need to be run? So I think there's a couple questions here. One, do we want to leave this code in our built-in templates? In which case we'll get issues like this where the customer has to change their setup quite a bit. Or do we want to let the customer define where and when the stage runs by updating their YAML file by putting in DAST, in the correct order? There's one other option here, which is that we could consider adding a new stage. And as I wrote this issue, I don't think this is a really good approach, but we could theoretically add a post-deploy step or something similar into GitLab. The reason I don't think that's a great approach is then we are requiring that DAST or fuzzing run after deploy. And I think customers should have the flexibility to define all their own stages and not have to worry about overriding a new stage or dealing with that. So my recommendation for this would be that we have customers add this into their YAML file because it gives them the most flexibility, means that we're not overriding anything, we're not overly prescriptive, but it is one small additional setup step. So there's a couple issues to look at. This is the clarify that a stage has been added to run DAST. And then I don't have an issue yet opened, but we'll have one for fuzzing, whether we should have these stages in the fuzzing issue or in the fuzzing template, or whether customers should be adding those. And then if customers add those, we'll need to update the YAML generator, and then we'll need to update our documentation as well.